Our readings in the historical books take a sharp turn in this session. Remember, the exile was a 70-year period during which the Israelites were forcibly removed from Israel. During the exile, the leadership is different. The kings of Israel are no longer in power, and the kings of Babylon and Persia rule the Israelites. More importantly, the location has changed. Our study of the vast majority of the Old Testament takes place in the land of Israel. However, this story takes place in the heart of the Babylonian and Persian empires. The Israelites were forced to leave the land God had promised them and watched as their temple, the center point of Jewish worship, was destroyed. The trauma of being separated from their land cannot be overemphasized. It must have seemed as if everything about their land, culture, and faith had been destroyed. The key issue that the books of Daniel and Esther explore is maintaining a Jewish identity that is faithful to God, even when the surrounding culture works against it. Remember, the Israelites now live in a land where Yahweh is the foreign god. Their culture does not support their lifestyle and worship. In fact, many of the powerful leaders do not like them. The first material you read was out of the book of Daniel. This book is not technically one of the historical books, but is actually considered one of the prophetic books. However, we look at it with the historical books because we're trying to get the big picture of Israel's history in the Old Testament. The book of Daniel is different because it has two types of material. The first half of the book, which your reading came from, largely focuses on recounting the experiences of the Israelites while they are in exile in Babylon. The second half of the book is very different. Scholars use the term apocalyptic to describe the unique type of prophetic material in the second half of the book of Daniel. Now shift your focus to the first half of Daniel. What were the experiences of the Israelites while in captivity? Being the people of God doesn't require one to be at a particular place and time. It only requires a person to be faithful to the will of God. At the beginning of Daniel, you see the early efforts to separate the Israelite boys, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, from the way they have been raised. The Babylonians give them new names. They educate them in their customs and ways, and even seek to change what they eat. However, from very early in the story, you see the theme of this book emerge. Daniel and his friends commit to keeping themselves pure. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego raises the stakes even higher. These boys are determined to be faithful to God and not worship the idol built by Nebuchadnezzar. You see from the story that the issue for these boys was not God delivering them from tough circumstances, but their faithfulness to God, no matter what happened. Daniel chapter 3 verses 17 and 18 says that they had confidence in God, but even if God chose not to deliver them, they would not turn their back on their faith, a defiant and bold faith. In a sense, this is the high point of the story. God does deliver them, to the degree that even their clothes do not smell of smoke. This is not the end, because as you read, Nebuchadnezzar, a man who built an idol for the people to worship, is compelled to give praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You also read of Daniel's encounter with the king. Daniel's story is very similar to that of the three boys. When commanded to stop praying to God, Daniel does not hide, but continues to be faithful to God in a very public way. When faced with what seems like certain death, Daniel calmly accepts his fate. He determines that the integrity of his faith is more important than the consequences of his actions. As with the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel is delivered from his circumstances. King Darius even issues a proclamation of the greatness of God. Again, Daniel's commitment to his faith not only impacts him, but also those around him. The book of Esther tells us a similar story from a different perspective and holds a unique spot in the Old Testament. Early in the formation of the Old Testament, some leaders wanted to exclude Esther because the book does not mention God. Also, the story revolves around a woman, something some individuals saw as inappropriate. However, the people of God have long affirmed the place of Esther in the Bible and the character of Esther herself. As with the first half of the book of Daniel, Esther demonstrates the challenge of being true to her Jewish faith apart from Israel, and the book demonstrates the faithfulness of God to his people. The purpose of this book is to explain the origins of a very important celebration in the Jewish community, known as the Feast of Purim. The story you read was that of King Ahasuerus looking for a queen. One of his advisors is Esther's uncle, Mordecai, who raised Esther. Mordecai advises Esther to gain favor from the king so that she can become queen, but to keep her Jewish heritage a secret. Esther follows Mordecai's instructions and does indeed become the king's chosen queen. Haman, a key official of the king, is angered by Mordecai because he will not bow down to him. Haman begins a plot to destroy all the Jews and kill Mordecai. Mordecai encourages Esther to boldly go before King Ahasuerus and intervene on the behalf of the Jews. Esther is initially hesitant out of the fear that the king will kill her. This is when Mordecai tells her that perhaps she has been put in this position so that she can carry out the will of God. Mordecai emphasizes to Esther that if she chooses not to play her role, God will still be faithful and will still fulfill his will. In a sense, she is given a choice similar to that of Daniel and his friends. Will she be faithful regardless of the consequences? As the book ends, the king discovers the treachery of Haman and has him hanged on the gallows that Haman actually built for Mordecai. He then issues an order, allowing the Jews in Babylon to defend themselves. These books are in the Old Testament to remind the Israelites that they can be the people of God when they are not in Israel and when culture opposes them. Likewise, these books speak to us about our ability to be the people of God, regardless of the settings we find ourselves in or the consequences of being faithful. Now, take time to answer the relational questions to discover how these stories relate to your life.